I want to tell you something about the Mojave. Most people drive through it with the windows up, AC blasting, trying to get to the other side as fast as they can. They see desert, brown and flat and useless. They see nothing. But pilots, real pilots, they see it different. They see it the way old sailors used to see the ocean, like it's alive, like it's watching you back, like it has opinions about whether you live or die, and it'll share those opinions at about 200 knots. No warning, no apology. I was 19 the first time I stood on the tarmac at Whitmore Air Training Base, about 40 miles outside of Lancaster, California, and felt that desert wind hit me in the face like a wet sandbag. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't cinematic. It smelled like hot rubber and jet fuel, and a particular kind of anxiety that doesn't have a name yet but should. That was 9 years before the day I'm about to tell you about. 9 years before the day everything changed. The base looked the same in July 2019 as it probably looked in July 1989, which is to say, functional and aggressively ugly. The control tower was the color of old teeth. The hangars were the color of things that had given up on having a color. The runway stretched out into the desert like God had drawn a line in the dirt and dared someone to cross it. Whitmore wasn't famous. That was, in a strange way, its whole identity. You went to Edwards if you wanted to be photographed. You went to Whitmore if you wanted to be forgotten while you figured out if you were good enough. It was a proving ground in the oldest, most stripped-down sense of the word. No ceremony, no grandstand, no one holding a trophy at the end. Just the test. And the sky. The morning I'm talking about, July 14th, 2019, a Sunday, which felt wrong in the way that important things often feel wrong. The sky was doing something. Not a storm, nothing so dramatic. It was just textured, the kind of sky that makes old aviation instructors scratch the back of their necks and say things like, without elaborating. Wisps of cirrus way up high, moving sideways when the wind on the ground was moving forward. A discrepancy. A conversation happening between two weather systems that didn't quite agree. Staff Sergeant DeWitt, ground crew, 22 years on that base, was outside when I pulled into the parking lot. He was standing with his coffee mug and doing what I'd seen him do 100 mornings, staring up. "Morning, DeWitt." He said. That was it. That was his entire contribution to the discourse. Just and a slow sip of coffee while he kept looking at that sky like it owed him money. I should have paid more attention to the The briefing room at Whitmore smelled like old whiteboard marker and something faintly chemical that had been slowly seeping out of the walls since roughly 1994. There were 12 chairs. There were never 12 people. Usually there were 8, sometimes fewer. That morning there were 7 of us, plus Colonel Harlan Voss, who was standing at the front of the room with his arms crossed, which was how you knew the morning was going to be complicated. Voss was not a man you described as handsome. You described him as structured, like someone had built a face out of aircraft aluminum. Efficient lines, nothing wasted, zero aerodynamic drag. He'd been test pilot before he'd been administrator, and he'd never completely transitioned. He still looked at people the way pilots look at a questionable reading on an altimeter, calibrating, not trusting. On the whiteboard behind him were 6 words. Nighthawk 7. Threshold Recovery Protocol. 0900. I felt the room go a different kind of quiet when I read them. Not the quiet of people thinking. The quiet of people not quite breathing. Nighthawk 7. 4 pilots had attempted it. 4 pilots had failed. I'll tell you about each of them, because you need to understand what failure looked like before you can understand what success looked like. You need to understand what 4 men walked into before you understand what 1 girl walked out of. Chapter 2. 4 men, 4 failures, 4 different kinds of wrong. Let me introduce you to the failures first. Not because failure is interesting, it isn't, not on its own, but because each of these 4 men failed in a different direction, and that matters. The Nighthawk 7 protocol had a way of finding exactly the specific thing you were missing and shoving it in your face at 300 miles per hour. Pilot 1, Captain James Rourke. Rourke was the kind of pilot movies get made about. Former Navy, carrier landings in bad weather, calm voice in every crisis that had ever come his way. He had the kind of confidence that wasn't arrogance. It was just accumulated evidence. He'd done enough things right to have earned the certainty that he would do most things right. That certainty was exactly what got him. Nighthawk 7 is a threshold recovery protocol, meaning it's designed to simulate complete system failure at altitude, and you have 60 seconds to bring the aircraft back from the edge of uncontrolled descent. 60 seconds, not 59, not 61. The window the designers had calculated for controlled recovery, given the specific aerodynamic properties of the modified A-22 test frame, was exactly 60 seconds, plus or minus 2. Rourke went in confident. He came out 14 seconds late. That doesn't sound like much. 14 seconds. But at the descent rate the simulation pushed to, an intentional 35-degree nose-down attitude with spoilers deployed, and both thrust reversers feeding false data back to the onboard systems. 14 seconds late was the difference between landing a plane and becoming a crater. Rourke said afterward, in his debrief, something I've thought about 100 times since. He said, "I kept waiting to recognize the pattern. That was it. That was the whole thing. He had done so many recoveries that he was waiting for the Nighthawk to feel like the others. It never did. And while he was waiting, the clock kept going." Pilot 2, Captain Yusuf Adeyemi. Adeyemi was from Lagos originally, which he'd mentioned maybe once every 6 months, and never in a way that invited conversation about it. He was compact and serious, and did not lose at anything that involved spatial reasoning. He'd scored in the 99th percentile on every assessment that measured three-dimensional thinking. If you needed someone to understand where things were in space, where the threat was, where the exit was, where the aircraft was relative to everything else, you called Adeyemi. His failure was quieter than Rourke's, more painful to watch, from what I heard. He got into the recovery sequence and did everything right. Textbook orientation, correct thrust input, perfect pitch corrections in the first 40 seconds. Then at approximately T+41, a second anomaly introduced itself into the simulation, a hydraulic fluctuation that the protocol designers had added in the revision 6 months prior, after Rourke's attempt. Adeyemi saw it, assessed it, made the statistically correct decision to address it. But addressing it took 3 seconds he didn't have. He crossed the recovery threshold at 63 seconds. 3 seconds. In his debrief, Adeyemi didn't say much. He sat with his hands folded on the table and stared at the middle distance for a long time. Then he said, "I trusted my math." The implication being, the math was right. The math just ran out of time. Pilot 3, Major David Parrish. Parrish I actually knew. Not well. He'd rotated through Whitmore on temporary assignment from Nellis, and we'd shared a table in the mess exactly twice, and talked about nothing in particular. He had a kind face, and a habit of tapping his left knee when he was thinking, which he did constantly, which meant he was always thinking. He didn't make it past the first 15 seconds. Not because he panicked, not because he froze, because he made a decision. A fast, clean, decisive decision that was exactly wrong. And by the time the data came back telling him it was wrong, he'd committed to it too fully to unwind. The recovery protocol begins with the pilot in a disoriented state. Literally. The simulation platform induces approximately 8 seconds of controlled vestibular confusion before the clock starts. You come out of it already behind, already tilted, already managing a nervous system that is telling you things that are not quite true. Parrish came out of those 8 seconds and pulled. In most recovery situations, you pull, you pitch up, you fight the descent, you trade altitude for speed with a nose-up attitude. Nighthawk 7, by design, was not most situations. The specific fault combination it simulates requires a brief, counterintuitive push, a deepening of the dive, a deliberate trading of altitude for control authority, before the recovery is possible. It is, as the chief engineer who designed it put it in the documentation, the aerodynamic equivalent of leaning into a punch. Parrish pulled. The simulation logged unrecoverable descent at T+15. He didn't say anything in his debrief. He sat down. He looked at the data printout for a long time. Then he folded it in half and put it in his shirt pocket, and I think he carried it around for weeks after. Pilot 4. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb. Webb was the last attempt before mine. He'd flown the protocol on a Thursday in April, 2 months and 22 days before that Sunday morning in July. He was the most decorated pilot on base, the most experienced, the most studied. He'd gone over the Nighthawk 7 documentation with an engineering team for 3 weeks before his attempt. He'd built a simulation of the simulation on his personal computer. He'd run it 600 times. He knew the math, the aerodynamics, the decision tree, the timing. He knew every single thing about it except how it would feel. He made it to 57 seconds. 3 seconds short. He pulled out of the dive correctly, made the right choice at T+12. Managed the hydraulic anomaly, completed the pitch recovery sequence by the textbook, and then something in the final phase, the lateral roll correction that was the last step of the 60-second window, didn't respond the way it did in his practice runs, because the actual test frame had a slightly different aileron sensitivity than the model he'd been practicing on, a difference of less than 2%. He compensated, correctly. But the compensation took 4 seconds instead of the 1 second his muscle memory had been trained for. 57 seconds. Webb left the debrief room and went directly to his car, and sat in it for 45 minutes before driving away. Nobody went to check on him. Some things you sit with alone. Everybody on base understood that. So that was the ledger. As of Sunday morning, July 14th, 2019. 4 attempts. 4 failures. Different failures, different timings, different specific points of fracture, but all of them failures. Colonel Voss stood at the whiteboard with his arms crossed and looked at us. "One more attempt approved by command," he said. "1. We're not running this through another cycle if this doesn't work. Nighthawk 7 gets shelved, the protocol gets redesigned from the ground up, and we lose approximately 8 months of development work." He paused. Not for drama. Voss didn't do drama. He paused because he was giving the information time to be processed. "I need a volunteer." Nobody moved. I mean nobody. 6 people in those chairs, not counting me, and not a single muscle moved. The desert wind hit the side of the building. The fluorescent light in the back of the room buzzed. I raised my hand. Chapter 3. Why my hand went up. People ask me about that moment a lot. They want the cinematic answer. They want me to say I felt something pull at me, felt the call, felt destiny, all the words that make a moment into a narrative. The truth is messier. My hand went up because I was thinking about 3 things simultaneously, and none of them were heroic. The first thing I was thinking about was Lieutenant Colonel Webb sitting in his car for 45 minutes. I'd seen that. I'd been walking back to my barracks from the equipment room that Thursday in April, and I'd passed the parking lot and seen his car sitting there with the engine off and the windows fogging up slightly from the inside. And I'd known immediately, the way you know things on a base where everyone is performing competence constantly, that something had broken in there. Not Webb himself necessarily, but something. The second thing I was thinking about was a particular sentence from the Nighthawk 7 documentation, which I'd read through 3 times over the past 2 months because I am, by nature, a person who reads documentation obsessively and for fun. The sentence was in Appendix C, buried under a section about aileron response modeling, and it said, "Recovery success in threshold scenarios is statistically correlated with pilot response time during the disorientation phase. Pilots who act within 2.3 seconds of regaining vestibular equilibrium demonstrate 34% higher recovery rates than those who wait for full situational clarity before responding. Act before you fully understand. Move before you can see clearly." That sentence had been in the back of my head for weeks. Not because I was planning to volunteer. I wasn't planning anything. I'm not a planner in the Hollywood sense. I'm more of an obsessive reader who occasionally finds herself in situations where what she read turns out to matter. The third thing, and this is the one I'm most reluctant to tell you, because it sounds small, was that I was cold. I know. It's the Mojave Desert in July. But the briefing room was air-conditioned to a temperature that I'm convinced was some kind of test in itself, and I was wearing short sleeves because I'd been running before the briefing, and my arms were cold, and I'd been sitting there getting steadily colder and more uncomfortable for 20 minutes while Voss talked, and raising my hand was, in some extremely mundane way, a decision to do something, to move, to stop being cold and static and waiting. The body wants to move. The body doesn't care about your career or your survival statistics. It just knows that sitting still is sometimes worse than moving. That's not the inspiring version, but it's what actually happened. Voss looked at me for a moment. His expression did the thing it does, the altimeter calibration thing, assessing. Lieutenant Vasquez. Yes, sir. You've reviewed the full documentation package? 3 times, sir. Another pause. Measuring something. Appended revisions through April? The hydraulic anomaly specification. Yes, sir. Something shifted fractionally in his face. Not approval. More like the thing that comes before approval decides whether it's warranted. Briefing at 08:30. Solo. My office. Yes, sir. He looked at me for one more second, and then he looked at the whiteboard, and then he uncrossed his arms and picked up his briefing folder, and that was it. The room exhaled. 6 people who had not raised their hands found somewhere else to look. Sergeant DeWitt passed me in the hallway on my way to the locker room. He looked at me, then up at the sky through the window at the end of the hall. He said again. I was starting to think DeWitt communicated exclusively in premonitions. Chapter 4. What they didn't put in the documentation. The briefing with Voss in his office was nothing like what you'd see in a movie. There was no inspiring speech. There was no, "I believe in you, Vasquez." There was no moment where he looked me in the eye and told me what I was capable of. What there was, a small office with too many file folders and a wall-mounted fan that worked intermittently. Voss's desk was covered in papers arranged in a system that looked chaotic but probably had an internal logic comprehensible only to Voss himself. There was a framed photo on the desk facing away from visitors, which I always figured was deliberate. Not hiding it, just not offering it. He sat across from me and went through the documentation addendum by addendum. Rourke's debrief, Adeyemi's debrief, Parrish's, Webb's. He didn't editorialize. He read the relevant sections and set them aside and moved on, like he was giving me equipment. Here, here, here. Take this. When he was done, he sat back and looked at me. You have a question, he said. Not, do you have a question? He could see one on my face, and he was naming it. The disorientation phase, I said. The documentation notes 8 seconds. But in Adeyemi's debrief, he describes it as feeling like more. Voss nodded. Slowly. What Adeyemi experienced was accurate, he said. Subjective time during vestibular disruption expands. 8 seconds will feel like 20. This is documented. He paused. It is also not the thing most pilots struggle with. What is? He looked at the wall for a second. Not evasion. More like choosing words that were slightly more honest than the ones that came first. The thing most pilots struggle with, he said, is that the protocol is designed to feel unrecoverable. That sat there for a moment. By design, I said. By specific design. The engineers built in sensory cues that, taken together, tell the pilot's body that the aircraft is beyond salvage. The altitude reading, the G-force profile, the sound. There is a specific harmonic that the airframe produces in that configuration that is, physiologically, the sound of things going wrong beyond correction. He said it without drama, because Voss didn't do drama. 4 experienced pilots perceived those cues and believed them on some level. Even Rourke, who scored the highest on cognitive override exercises. Even Webb, who had practiced the protocol 600 times. At some point in the 60 seconds, each of them felt it was over. I sat with that. Did feeling it's over make it over? For 3 of them, yes, they yielded a second somewhere, then 2, then 6. You cannot yield seconds in Nighthawk 7. He paused again. Adeyemi was different. He never felt it was over. He simply ran out of math. So the protocol finds your specific weakness. It finds the one thing you cannot override, he said. For Rourke, that was waiting for familiarity. For Parrish, it was trusting his first instinct. For Webb, it was trusting his preparation. A fraction of a pause. Adeyemi trusted his competence. I heard what he wasn't quite saying. "What's mine?" I asked. He looked at me, and for just a moment, 1 second, maybe 2, something in his face did a thing that wasn't the altimeter calibration. Something slightly different, slightly more human, and slightly less engineered. "That," he said, "is what the next hour will tell us." Outside the window, the Mojave did what the Mojave does. The wind moved across it, indifferent and warm and old, and somewhere behind me in the base, someone was running an engine test, and the sound of it came through the walls like a reminder that the world was mechanical and would not wait. I thought about that sentence from Appendix C. Act before you fully understand. Move before you can see clearly. I thought about Webb in his car. I thought about the specific quality of the cold in the briefing room and how my hand had moved. Then I stopped thinking and listened to what Voss was saying, because the next 8 things he told me were the 8 most important things anyone had ever told me, and I was going to need every single one of them in exactly 56 minutes. Here is what I want you to understand about Colonel Voss's 8 pieces of information. They weren't inspirational. They weren't tactical, exactly. They were something in between. The kind of knowledge that lives in the gap between what the manual says and what the situation actually is. The kind of thing an instructor tells you when they've decided that you're past the point of needing to be protected from truth. He gave them to me one at a time, from that intermittently working fan, in that too many folders office, with the Mojave making its opinions known through the wall. The first thing, the 8 seconds of disorientation in the protocol, are calibrated to what engineers call full vestibular disruption, what they did not account for in the original design, and what I observed across all 4 previous attempts, is that the clock does not start when the pilot regains full equilibrium. It starts when the protocol device triggers. I looked at him. Meaning the clock starts while I'm still disoriented. Meaning you will have approximately 2 to 3 seconds of your 60-second window, during which your inner ear will be telling you things that are factually incorrect. You will need to decide, in those first 2 to 3 seconds, which inputs you trust. Which inputs you trust. I stored that and moved to the next thing. The second thing, the hydraulic anomaly, the one that appeared in the April revision, triggers at T+41 in every instance. Not approximately 41 seconds. Exactly 41 seconds. The engineers programmed it as a fixed variable. Adeyemi encountered it as a surprise. You do not need to. I can be ready for it. You can be ready for it. But being ready for it is not the same as knowing how to respond to it. The correct response, which Adeyemi derived through real-time calculation, is a 3-second input on the left trim wheel. Adeyemi's calculation took 4 seconds. Your input, if you've already decided on the response, should take closer to 1. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. On it was a single diagram, a trim wheel, with an arrow indicating direction, and a handwritten number, 2.8 seconds. This is what I've had time to derive from Adeyemi's data. Not 3 seconds. 2.8. I looked at the paper. Then I folded it and put it in my chest pocket. I won't need to look at it again, I said. He didn't question that. He just moved on. The third thing. The sound. He said just those 2 words and stopped. You mentioned it, I said. The harmonic. The sound that tells you it's over. Yes. I am going to describe it to you now, and you are going to remember this description, and when you hear the sound during the protocol, you are going to hear my description instead of the sound itself. That was strange. Not illogical. Strange. Like being handed a pair of glasses for your ears. The sound begins at approximately T+5, once the dive attitude is fully established. It is a low-register vibration, around 90 Hz, that produces a sympathetic resonance in the pilot's sternum. Not painful, but insistent. He looked at me steadily. It is the fuselage talking to you. It is the aircraft telling you, with complete physical honesty, that it is in a configuration it was not designed for and does not prefer. And the pilots heard that and believed it meant unrecoverable. The aircraft is not wrong, Voss said. The configuration is dangerous. The sound is accurate. What the sound does not know, what the aircraft cannot know, is that you have 60 seconds in which the configuration is survivable. The aircraft is experiencing the moment. You are the one who has the full 60 seconds in your head. I sat with this. The sound is telling the truth, I said, but it's telling a partial truth. Yes. And now something in his voice changed. Barely. Fractionally. In the way that Voss's voice changed instead of his face. Every one of those 4 men heard that sound, and gave it the credit it was asking for. Rourke waited for a pattern he recognized. Parrish pulled. Webb recalibrated. Adeyemi calculated. All of them were responding to the sound. What should I do with it? Hear it. Know it. Let it be true. And then do the next thing anyway. The 4th thing. Your left hand. What about it? Adeyemi's debrief noted a 3-second latency in his trim wheel input that he attributed to a moment of competing inputs. He was simultaneously correcting pitch with his right hand while trying to address the hydraulic anomaly with his left, and his left-hand response time degraded. Dual tasking at high G. At high G, under vestibular disruption, with a 90 Hz harmonic in your sternum, in a 60-second window you are already running behind on a beat. Your left hand is your weaker hand. I need you to know that before you're in the aircraft. I flexed my left hand under the desk. Thought about the trim wheel diagram. 2.8 seconds. With my left hand, at 4 Gs. I'll manage, I said. I know you will, Voss said. And that was the closest Voss came, that morning, to telling me something that wasn't purely informational. The 5th thing. The visual display will tell you at T+30 that you have exceeded the recoverable altitude threshold. This is a feature of the protocol. It is also technically true. The aircraft at T+30 is below the threshold at which recovery is possible using standard procedures. But Nighthawk 7 isn't standard procedures. Nighthawk 7 is a modified recovery sequence that was designed specifically for below-threshold situations. The visual warning is not wrong. It is simply warning you about a situation that the protocol was designed to address. A pause. 3 of the 4 previous pilots reduced their inputs by an estimated 15 to 20% following the T+30 warning. I thought about that. Reducing inputs when the screen says you're already past saving. They believed they were managing a crash, I said, not completing a recovery. Yes. What did Webb do? Webb maintained his inputs. He did not reduce them. He was the only one who did not. Voss's voice did the fractional thing again. He came the closest. 57 seconds. 3 short, but the only one who kept believing. The 6th thing. At T+50, there will be a lateral oscillation. The airframe will begin a rhythmic rocking motion, approximately 0.3 Gs, side to side, at roughly 2 cycles per second. The engineers introduced this in the Webb revision as an additional input disruption factor. How long does it last? 7 seconds. Which takes us to 57. Yes. T+57. 3 seconds before the window closes. The oscillation would last 7 seconds, from 50 to 57, and the final roll correction, which had cost Webb his attempt, fell at the tail end of that oscillation. You had to do precise work while the aircraft was actively trying to shake you. The lateral roll correction at the end, I said. What's the input magnitude? Voss told me. Then he told me again. Then he told me a 3rd time, in a slightly different way, until I had it down to the neuromuscular level, where it stops being information and starts being reflex. The 7th thing. You will feel, at some point in the sequence, that you have made an error. I waited. This is also a feature. The protocol introduces a feedback delay at T plus 35. The aircraft response to inputs lags by approximately 1.2 seconds. This is not a malfunction. It is deliberate. It makes correct inputs feel wrong, because you apply the input and nothing happens for 1.2 seconds. And in that 1.2 seconds, most people second-guess the input and modify it. And modifying a correct input makes it incorrect. Yes, I thought about Parrish, who trusted his first instinct. The 1.2-second lag is what got Parrish. Voss said nothing, which was confirmation. When I apply an input at T plus 35, I sit on it for 1.5 seconds before I assess whether it was right. That is the correct approach, Voss said, and there was something in the way he said it. Something that sounded like relief, maybe, or like confirmation of a theory he'd been running for months. The eighth thing. He was quiet for a moment before the eighth thing. Longer than the other pauses. Long enough that the fan did its intermittent thing. Cut out for a second, buzzed back in. And neither of us acknowledged it. The 60 seconds, he said finally. What is the 60 seconds for you? I wasn't sure I understood the question. It's the recovery window, I said. That is what it is technically. I'm asking what it is for you. In your body. In your head. He looked at me with the calibrating look. What 60 seconds feels like, to you, specifically, will determine whether you have enough of it. I sat with that for a moment. I thought about the things I had done in 60 seconds. A minute. 60 full turns of a clock's second hand. The time it takes to brush your teeth properly. The time it takes for a traffic light to cycle. The time it takes to decide if you're going to raise your hand in a briefing room while your arms are cold. It's enough time, I said. Not a brave thing to say, not even a confident thing, just a factual thing, delivered in the same register that Voss delivered everything. He looked at me for 3 more seconds. Then he stood up and handed me the instrument check form. 0900, he said. Don't eat anything heavy. Chapter 6. The walk to the aircraft. I want to tell you about the walk. Not the equipment check. I'll get to that. But the actual walk from the prep building to the modified A-22, which sat on the secondary runway, in a way that managed to look both mundane and preposterous. Mundane because it was just an aircraft, just a machine, just metal and composites and wiring. Preposterous because 4 people had walked to it and walked away from it changed, and I knew that. And I knew that I knew that, and it's impossible to be fully relaxed while carrying that kind of awareness. The walk was about 300 meters. I counted my steps without planning to. 412, in my case, which is roughly average for someone my height. The Mojave was doing its thing. Full morning now. The sun passed the rim of the mountains to the east, and already making its intentions clear. Heat shimmering up off the tarmac in lazy, unhurried waves. The kind of heat that isn't angry. It's just what that place is, and it has been for approximately 4,000 years, and it doesn't particularly care about your 60-second window. Sergeant DeWitt was standing beside the aircraft. This was not his job, technically. His role in the day's proceedings was complete. The instrument check, the pre-flight, the verification protocols had all been done before 7 in the morning. He had no professional reason to be standing next to the A-22 at 0845. He was just there, holding his coffee mug, still, which I suspected had gone cold 2 hours ago, but which he was holding because that's what DeWitt did. He held things. I stopped next to him. We both looked at the aircraft for a second. You read the appendices? He said. 3 times. All of them? Or just C? I looked at him. He shrugged. There's a thing in Appendix F. About the oscillation. The engineers who designed it described it as. He stopped, looked at his coffee mug, then looked back at the aircraft. They called it a cognitive interruption event, which is engineer speak for something that makes you lose the thread. Makes you forget where you are in the sequence. Makes you forget how much time you have left. Specifically, he glanced at me. Not the calibrating look. Something different, more human. The guys who've gone in, they've all come back saying the oscillation felt longer than 7 seconds. Felt like it was eating the last bit of time. Because they were tracking time while it was happening. Right. I thought about that. The difference between waiting for something to end and just doing the next thing while it's happening. Don't count the seconds during the oscillation, I said. Not a question. That's what I'd say if anyone was asking me, DeWitt said. Which was his version of yes. He didn't say anything else. Didn't need to. He went back to looking at the aircraft, and I went forward to the aircraft. And that was the conversation. 12 words of useful information, wrapped in approximately 40 words of not quite saying it. Appendix F. I had read it. But I'd read it the way you read legal fine print, absorbing but not prioritizing. Now it resorted itself in my memory and landed in the right place. Don't count. The pre-flight check took 22 minutes. I will not give you the full checklist because it is both classified in parts and deeply boring and whole, but I'll give you the parts that mattered to my next hour. Item 17 on the check. Left trim wheel. Resistance test. The trim wheel in the A-22 had a friction coefficient that Adeyemi's engineers had noted was 17% higher than standard after the April revision. Higher friction meant more deliberate input, more physical effort for 2.8 seconds at 4 Gs. I pushed the wheel through its full range twice, noted the resistance, translated it into muscle memory. Item 29. Instrument display calibration. The altimeter. The one that would tell me at T+30 that I'd passed the recoverable threshold. I looked at it for a long time. Just stared at it. Long enough that it became familiar. Long enough that I could, in some quiet way, separate the instrument from its message. It's a number. On a screen. It will be true and simultaneously misleading. I know this. I know this. I know this. Item 38. Helmet seal check. The harmonic. The 90 Hz vibration that would come through the seat, through the suit, through the sternum. The helmet wouldn't stop it. It wasn't that kind of vibration. But the ritual of the seal check, click, pressurize, verify, put a layer of intention between me and what was coming. Not protection. Preparation. When I climbed into the cockpit, it was 0857. 3 minutes. The cockpit of the A-22 is not large. Most people describe it as efficient, which is the word you use when you mean small, but don't want to say small. You're surrounded by it. The panels, the controls, the displays. In a way that should feel confining, but mostly feels like being held. Like the machine has made room for exactly you and nothing extra. I ran the startup sequence. The engine came up. The cockpit filled with the particular vibration of organized mechanical energy, which is different from any other vibration in the world in a way that's difficult to describe to someone who hasn't felt it. It goes through you, not aggressively. More like a conversation the machine is having with you, in a frequency your skin understands, even if your brain is busy with other things. I thought about all 4 of them. Rourke, who waited for familiarity. Adeyemi, who trusted his math. Parrish, who trusted his first instinct. Webb, who trusted his preparation. I thought about what I was going to trust. And then the control tower said, Whitmore 907, you are cleared for threshold protocol. Clock initializes on your mark. My thumb found the mark button. 907, I said. Ready. I pressed the button. Chapter 7. The first 20 seconds. T+0. The disorientation protocol engaged. Here is the thing about describing vestibular disruption after the fact. You can't do it accurately. The words available to describe sensory confusion are themselves sensory words, so you end up describing confusion with clarity, which is a contradiction that doesn't fully resolve. I'll do my best. It was like, not exactly like this, but close. It was like being in an elevator that decides, midway between floors, to also be a tumble dryer. Spatial references dissolved. Up was a suggestion. Down was negotiable. Forward was a direction that had apparently taken a personal day. 8 seconds. I knew it was 8 seconds. I held that knowledge the way you hold a rope in dark water, not gripping it exactly, but keeping a hand on it. 8 seconds is less than the time it takes to hum Happy Birthday once. I know that. I know that. 8 seconds is not long enough for anything important to become impossible. I breathed. This sounds simple. It wasn't. The vestibular disruption produces a kind of low-grade panic in the brainstem that is not psychological. It is physiological, below the level of thought, the body's reptile core responding to the information that gravity has become unreliable. Breathing against that is an act of will. I breathed. 4 seconds in, I registered the clock in my head, counting without counting. Not numbers, exactly. More like a rhythm. The protocol will be over before this rhythm repeats itself twice. At 6 seconds, I felt the dive attitude beginning to establish. The nose going down. The G's beginning to accumulate. The specific, deliberate wrongness of the configuration coming online. At 7 seconds, the sound started. The harmonic. 90 hertz. Low. Persistent. In the seat. In the suit. In the sternum, exactly where Voss said it would be. It is the fuselage talking to you. I heard Voss's voice in the vibration. Not literally. I'm not describing something hallucinatory. I mean that I'd stored his description of the sound so carefully, in such detail, that when I encountered the real thing, the description was already there, like a translation. The sound arrived, and I already had words for it. And words give you distance. And distance is the thing you need between you and a sensory input that's trying to hijack your judgment. The aircraft is experiencing the moment. You are the one who has the full 60 seconds in your head. The disorientation cleared. T+3. Maybe T+4. Slightly ahead of what Voss had predicted, or maybe I was tracking imprecisely. Either way, I had the aircraft. I had the controls. I had the 60 seconds. 56 of them left, give or take. I started. Nose attitude. I pushed forward. Not because it was instinct. It wasn't. It went against every physical instinct I had, which is the point. 3-5 degrees nose down and deepening. 4 Gs building. The ground becoming the sky's more threatening neighbor through the cockpit glazing. Parrish pulled here. I pushed. I trusted Voss. I trusted Appendix C. I trusted the 34% statistic, and the specific articulate truth of those engineers who had designed a thing that felt like dying but wasn't. T+8, pitch attitude established. T+10, thrust input. The protocol simulates partial thrust availability. You have approximately 60% of rated thrust, distributed unevenly, because the right engine is reading false data. You can feel it. The asymmetry. The aircraft wanting to yaw right when you need it straight. Correction input. Rudder. Clean, measured, sufficient. T+15. I passed the point where Parrish's simulation logged unrecoverable descent. T+15 felt exactly like T+14. Because it was. The timestamp was on the simulation's books, not on the physics. The aircraft didn't know it was past saving at T+15. Only Parrish's protocol printout knew that, and Parrish's protocol printout wasn't in my cockpit. T+20. I was through the first phase. Dive established. Thrust managed. Attitude correct. The 90 Hz harmonic was still doing its thing in my sternum, persistent and honest. I let it be there. I did the next thing anyway. Chapter 8. The middle 30 seconds where everything got interesting. T+23. Something happened that wasn't in the documentation. Not a system failure. Not an anomaly. Something in my own head. A moment, maybe 2 seconds long, where the completeness of what I was doing arrived fully. 4 Gs, 3-5 degrees nose down. Ground expanding in the cockpit display, 60% thrust. Asymmetric yaw. 90 Hz in my chest. 217 knots in building. A complete catalog of wrong. And beneath that catalog, something older. Something below the level of pilot training and protocol documentation. Something biological. The part of my brain that is not a pilot. The part that is an animal, that has been an animal for approximately 400 million years, looked at the catalog of wrong and said, with complete seriousness, this is the end. Not a thought, not a voice, more like a weather system, Like the thing Voss described when he said the previous pilots felt it was over. I understood, in that 2-second moment, exactly what he meant, in a way that reading about it had not prepared me for. The animal part of my brain was absolutely certain we were going to die. And it had a very good case. T plus 25. I looked at my right hand. My right hand was on the pitch control, making micro-adjustments. Correct micro-adjustments. The kind that felt automatic. The kind you build over 9 years and 8,000 hours. My right hand was doing its job, which it had always done. I looked at my right hand and thought, "You're not done. Don't you dare be done." Not to the aircraft, not to the situation. To myself. T plus 30. The visual display changed. Numbers. Altitude. Threshold warning. The bright orange that means, in the language of aircraft instrumentation, that you have exceeded the altitude below which recovery is not possible using standard procedures. I looked at it. I breathed. I thought about what Voss had said. The visual warning is not wrong. It is simply warning you about a situation that the protocol was designed to address. 3 of 4 pilots reduced inputs here. I increased mine slightly. Not dramatically. This wasn't defiance, wasn't bravado. It was arithmetic. At the current rate of descent, with the current attitude, the recovery sequence required a specific input magnitude. The display was telling me a truth that didn't apply to my specific 60 seconds. I needed the input magnitude that applied to my specific 60 seconds. I applied it. T plus 35. The feedback delay started. This is the one I'd been thinking about since the 7th piece of Voss's information. T plus 35. Almost dead center of the 60-second window. And suddenly the aircraft stops responding to inputs immediately. There's a 1.2-second lag. You push and nothing happens. You adjust pitch and the nose waits 1.2 seconds before acknowledging. At T plus 36, I made a trim correction. The aircraft did nothing. The animal part of my brain said, "You got it wrong." I sat on it. Counted nothing. Held the input. Let the 1.2 seconds happen. At T plus 37.2, the trim correction registered. The aircraft responded. It was correct. I felt something that I want to be honest about. It was not triumph, and it was not relief. It was more like the particular satisfaction of having correctly anticipated something precise and physical and difficult. The way a musician feels when a difficult passage lands exactly right. Not surprise, because you practiced for this. But confirmation. The world did the thing you predicted it would do. That feeling lasted approximately 0.4 seconds. Because at T plus 38, 2 other things needed doing. T plus 39, lateral correction, maintaining the recovery heading against the asymmetric yaw. T plus 40, pitch adjustment, second phase of the dive recovery beginning. And at T plus 41, the hydraulic anomaly. I knew it was coming. I had known it was coming since the morning briefing. I had Voss's paper in my chest pocket with the numbers on it. 2.8 seconds. Left trim wheel. I had been carrying that fact around for 3 hours like a smooth stone in my hand. The anomaly arrived exactly on time. There was a shudder, brief, sharp, specific, in the control feedback. The kind of shudder that means a hydraulic system is telling you something has changed in its world. In a normal aircraft, in a normal situation, you'd investigate. You'd take your time. You'd diagnose. T plus 41 was not a normal situation. My left hand found the trim wheel. 2.8 seconds. That was the number. Not 3. Not 2.5. 2.8 seconds of deliberate, sustained input, while simultaneously maintaining pitch with my right hand, and managing the asymmetric yaw with the rudder pedals, and listening to the 90 Hz harmonic, and watching the altitude display, and not believing the orange warning, and sitting on my corrections for 1.2 seconds, and generally doing about 7 things that each required full attention, and only had fractional attention available. 2.8 seconds. My left hand did it. I counted without counting. Not 1, 2, 3. More like a breath. In, sustained, beginning of out. That's approximately 2.8 seconds for me. That's a number I know about my own body. At T plus 43.8, I released the trim wheel. The hydraulic anomaly cleared. Adeyemi had taken 4 seconds. I had taken 2.8. That 1.2-second difference had cost him 3 seconds of recovery time, because in addressing the anomaly for a second too long, he'd fallen behind on his pitch correction and had to double back. I hadn't fallen behind. I was, as of T plus 44, approximately where I needed to be. T plus 45, pitch correction, third phase. The nose was coming up. Slowly, because slowly was correct. The dive recovery in Nighthawk 7 is not a violent pull, it's a sustained, progressive return to level flight attitude, like unwinding something instead of snapping it. T plus 48, heading correction. The asymmetric thrust was pushing me 3 degrees left of recovery heading. I corrected. Applied it for the full 1.2 lag period. Let it take. T plus 50, the lateral oscillation began. The airframe started rocking. 0.3 Gs, side to side, 2 cycles per second. Not violent, more like a boat in a wake. But a boat in a wake when you're trying to make precise control inputs with both hands and both feet, while managing 7 simultaneous variables with a clock you're not counting, and a harmonic in your chest. DeWitt's voice, from 300 meters back across the tarmac. Don't count the seconds during the oscillation. I didn't count. I did the next thing. T plus 50, primary oscillation correction, maintaining heading. T plus 51, secondary pitch input, continuing the unwinding. T plus 52, left trim, minor, 0.4 seconds, correcting the hydraulic trim that had shifted during the anomaly. T plus 53, attitude holding. Holding. Not correcting, holding. Because sometimes the right thing to do is stop touching things and trust that the things you've already done are working. Even when the aircraft is rocking, and the alarm is orange, and the harmonic is in your sternum, and the animal part of your brain is updating its estimate of your survival odds downward in real time. T plus 54, holding. T plus 55, the lateral roll. The final step of the recovery sequence. This was what killed Webb. 3 seconds short, because the aileron sensitivity on the actual test frame was 2% different from the model he'd trained on. I had that fact in my head. I had Webb in his car for 45 minutes in my head. The roll correction was a left input, specific magnitude, specific duration, specific moment of release. The oscillation was still happening, which meant I was trying to make a precise lateral input while the aircraft was actively moving in the lateral axis. Appendix F, which DeWitt had told me to reread, the oscillation is a cognitive interruption event. It makes you lose the thread. I held the thread. T plus 55. Input applied. Left aileron. Magnitude from Voss's briefing. Adjusted 2% for the documented aileron sensitivity difference. Not a guess. A calculation I'd done in my head during the pre-flight check and then again during the walk, and then again during items 17 and 38 on the checklist. T plus 56. The oscillation was still doing its thing. The roll correction was in. I hadn't released it yet. T plus 57. The oscillation ended. I released the roll input at the moment it ended, because that was the correct time. T plus 58. The aircraft was returning to level flight attitude. T plus 59. The pitch attitude crossed the level threshold. T plus 60. The simulation logged. Threshold recovery. Complete. When the simulation logged completion, the aircraft didn't change immediately. That's a thing people don't think about. You're sitting in an aircraft that was, 2 seconds ago, in a controlled but terrifying 35-degree dive at 4 Gs, with a harmonic in your chest, and a hydraulic anomaly in your left-hand history, and an orange warning on your display, and an oscillation in your bones. And then the simulation completes, and the aircraft keeps flying. It doesn't know it passed. It's just an aircraft, doing what physics tells it to do, following the inputs it's been given over the past 60 seconds. The stick is in a position. The trim is set a certain way. The engine is delivering thrust at a specific level. None of that changes because a timer reached a number. I leveled off at approximately 4,200 feet and flew a westbound heading for about 40 seconds before I said anything. The control tower said, 907, confirm completion. Confirmed, I said. Stand by for recovery heading. Standing by. They gave me the heading. I flew it. I want to be honest about those 40 seconds of level flight before they gave me the heading. Because this is the part nobody tells you about, and it's actually the part I think about the most when I look back. There was no euphoria. I want to be clear about that because the movies make you expect euphoria. The fist in the air, the whoop over the radio, the wave of feeling that tells you that the hard thing was worth it and you were right and the world has reorganized itself in your favor. What I felt was more like quiet. Not emptiness, not anticlimax. More like the particular quality of quiet that exists after a very long sound stops. You become aware of your own heartbeat. You become aware that the harmonic is gone, the 90 hertz is gone, and the absence of it is almost as loud as the presence was. You become aware of your hands on the controls, which are making micro-corrections because that's what hands trained for 9 years do when they're on aircraft controls. They micro-correct, constantly, automatically, even when nothing needs correcting. I flew west for 40 seconds, and was very aware of my heartbeat, and the absence of the harmonic, and the small, involuntary corrections my hands were making. Then I thought about Lieutenant Colonel Webb. Not as a comparison, not in a way that was about me. I thought about him because he had made it to 57 seconds. 57. He had done everything right, essentially. He had maintained his inputs through the T+30 warning. He had managed the anomaly. He had held through the oscillation. He had been beaten by a 2% difference in aileron sensitivity that he had no way of knowing about because the data wasn't in the documentation he'd been given. 3 seconds. Because of information he hadn't been given. And I thought, I was given that information. Voss had given it to me. DeWitt had given me Appendix F. Someone had looked at the 4 failures and extracted the exact thing each one needed to know, and given it to me. I didn't succeed because I was better than Rourke or Adeyemi or Parrish or Webb. I want you to hear that clearly. I didn't succeed because I was braver, or more skilled, or more prepared. I succeeded because I had been given the specific information that 4 other people had generated through their specific failures, and I had been given it in time to use it. And I had been given it by people, Voss, DeWitt, who understood what I needed in a way I couldn't have articulated myself. 4 failures, distilled into 8 briefing points and a coffee mug's worth of wisdom from a ground crew sergeant who read appendices on his own time. I'm not saying that minimizes anything I did. I'm saying it complicates the idea that any success is purely individual. Chapter 10. The Debrief. The debrief was in the same room as the morning briefing. Different configuration. Voss at the table instead of the whiteboard. Recording equipment. A laptop showing the protocol data feeds from my attempt. Altitude, attitude, airspeed, control inputs, timing. Every second logged, every input recorded. The debrief was also the first time I saw the data from my own attempt from outside my own body, which is strange in the way that hearing your own recorded voice is strange. You recognize it. It looks approximately like what you were trying to do, but there are things you notice that you couldn't see from the inside. T+3, control input initiation. Voss noted this. You were in control earlier than any previous attempt. The vestibular disruption cleared faster for you. I was counting without counting, I said, which made no sense from the outside, but he seemed to understand it. T+35 to T+37.2, the feedback lag. My input held without modification for the full duration. Voss put his finger on the screen at the exact point where my input registered. You sat on it for 1.4 seconds, he said. I told you 1.5. I know. I cut it slightly short. And it worked. The input was correct. 1.4 was sufficient. 1.5 would have worked too. A pause. I was running slightly ahead of time and chose to move on. He looked at the data for a moment. Running ahead, he said. At that point, you were approximately 1.2 seconds ahead of the minimum required pace. Yes. How? I thought about it. The disorientation cleared faster than expected, I said, which gave me back about a second and a half. And the trim correction at T plus 43.8, the hydraulic anomaly response. I completed it in 2.8 seconds instead of 3. That gave me back another 0.2. I paused. The 1.2 seconds I gained were the margin that let me sit on the correction at T plus 35. Voss was quiet for a moment, looking at the data. Then, the 1.2 seconds you gained, he said, were they from training, from the briefing, or from something else? I thought about it honestly. Not performing humility or confidence. Just actually thinking. The briefing gave me the hydraulic anomaly time, I said. The specific 2.8 versus 3 seconds. That came from what you gave me. The disorientation clearing early. That might be training. Or it might have been the breathing exercise I've been doing for 3 years that I've never been able to convince anyone was operationally relevant. I almost smiled. Almost. And the lag correction, sitting on the input for 1.4 seconds when it felt wrong. That was the briefing. What about the roll correction? The aileron sensitivity adjustment, 2%. Also the briefing. Also the briefing. He nodded. Once. The way Voss nodded, like a single period at the end of a sentence. The breathing exercise, he said. Describe it. So I described it. 20 minutes, the next morning, in his office with the file folders and the intermittent fan, while he took notes on a legal pad in handwriting that looked like classified aircraft schematics. The breathing technique, which I'd gotten from a sports psychology paper about competitive freediving and had adapted for high-G scenarios over about 3 years of personal practice. The way it shortened the subjective experience of vestibular disruption, the way it gave you the sense of the rhythm, the 8 seconds, the 20 seconds it felt like, from the inside. He filled 2 pages of legal pad. When I was done, he looked at what he'd written. This will be in the next documentation revision, he said. The Appendix G. Yes. I felt something about that. Not pride exactly. Something more like the feeling of a chain. Rourke to Adeyemi, to Parrish, to Webb, to me, to whoever comes next. Each one adding a piece. Each failure generating information. Each success generating more information. The next person starting slightly further along because of what everyone before them had done and lost and documented. Not a chain. A bridge. You build bridges by standing somewhere and laying the next plank in front of you, and the person behind you adds to the far end of what you left, and eventually someone gets across. DeWitt told me about Appendix F, I said. Voss looked up from the legal pad. He told you to reread it. He told me not to count during the oscillation. A pause. Then, very slightly, the altimeter look did the human thing for the second time that day. I'll make sure his contribution is noted, Voss said. Chapter 11. The phone call. I wasn't expecting. The call came at 4:17 in the afternoon, to my cell phone, from a number with a DC area code. I should have not answered. The afternoon after a 6-month protocol attempt is not a time for DC area codes. It's a time for water and silence, and possibly a cheeseburger. I'd already had the water. I was halfway through the silence. The cheeseburger was theoretical at this point. I answered. The voice on the other end introduced itself in the clipped, no time for pleasantries way of people who call from DC area codes. It was someone from a department whose name I recognized as being adjacent to, but not quite, the official aviation test program that housed Nighthawk 7. Someone who knew about this morning, who had been watching the data feeds, who had access to things that I didn't know were being watched. Lieutenant Vasquez, the voice said. Congratulations on this morning. Thank you. We'd like to speak with you. In person. Washington. There's a program we think your capability profile is relevant to. I sat with that for a second. What kind of program? Not something I can discuss in detail on this line. Understood. Can you tell me anything about the aviation component? I can tell you it goes considerably further than threshold recovery protocols. A pause. How much further? That's something we'd discuss in person. Can you come to Washington? I looked out the window of my barracks room. The Mojave, doing what it does. The afternoon light laying itself across it in long, warm angles, the way desert light does in July, making something inhospitable look like it's been painted. A hawk. I could see it from where I sat, working a thermal above the ridge, effortless, patient, adjusting its relationship with the air in increments too small to see from the ground but each one exactly necessary. Which inputs do you trust? When? I said. Next week. Tuesday. I'll need to clear it through Colonel Voss. It's already cleared, the voice said, which is how I knew it was real. Chapter 12. What I told my sister that night. My sister Catalina called that same evening, because she's 6 years older and has an instinct for days when things happen, which is either psychic or the result of 29 years of close observation of me. Something happened today, she said. Not a question. I flew a test protocol. How'd it go? I finished it. A pause. Then, because Catalina has always been fluent in my understatements, other people didn't finish it? 4 other people didn't finish it. A longer pause. I could hear her sitting down somewhere in her apartment in San Diego, the specific soft creak of her couch that I knew from 8 years of phone calls. Her partner Carlos would be in the kitchen, probably. She'd be pulling her legs up under her, which is what she does when a conversation requires her full attention. Lena, she said. That's what she calls me. Not Elena. Lena. Only her. I'm fine, I said. I'm really fine. I didn't say you weren't. You were going to. I was going to say you're incredible, she said. I was going to say that, and it's annoying that you assume concern first. I didn't say anything for a second, because she was right, and I knew she was right. And I also knew exactly where the assumption of concern came from. 14 years of being the smaller one, the younger one, the one everyone was slightly worried about making it in a field where she was statistically improbable. I got a call, I said, from Washington. About? A new program. I don't know the details yet. I think it's bigger than what I've been doing. Another pause. Her thinking pause, which is shorter than it sounds. Are you scared? She said. And I thought about that. Really thought about it. The same way I'd thought about the 60 seconds in Voss's office. Not the cinematic answer. Not the thing that would make the moment into a narrative. Just the honest thing. I was scared this morning, I said. During the protocol, there was a moment, around T+23 or so, where the animal part of my brain decided very firmly that we were going to die. And I did the next thing anyway. Catalina was quiet for a moment. The couch creaked again. That's sort of your whole deal, she said. Yeah, I said. I think maybe it is. Are you going to Washington? Tuesday. Call me when you land. I always call you when I land. I know. I like reminding you. We talked for another 40 minutes about unrelated things. Carlos's new job, Catalina's students, a movie she'd seen that she couldn't decide if she hated or loved. Normal things, ordinary things. The kind of conversation you have when you've been something extreme, and you need to come back to where the ordinary things are. When we hung up, I sat in the barracks room for a while longer. The hawk was gone from the ridge. The Mojave had gone dark, the way it goes dark quickly and completely, like a light being switched rather than dimmed. I thought about T+60, the simulation logging complete. I thought about Webb in his car. I thought about Appendix F and DeWitt's coffee mug, and the legal pad in Voss's office that was going to become Appendix G. I thought about the DC area code. And then I thought about something that Voss had said in that briefing that I hadn't fully unpacked until now. He'd said, "What 60 seconds feels like, to you, specifically, will determine whether you have enough of it." And I'd answered, "It's enough time." What I hadn't said, because I didn't have the words for it yet, was why it was enough time. It was enough time because I had spent 9 years learning to trust certain inputs over others. It was enough time because 4 people before me had spent their 60 seconds generating information that they handed forward. It was enough time, because a colonel with a file folder office had sat across from me for 45 minutes and given me 8 specific truths. It was enough time because a sergeant with a cold coffee mug had said 4 words, "Don't count the seconds," that landed in exactly the right place. 60 seconds is a very small amount of time, until it's all you need. Washington, D.C. in July smells different from the Mojave in July. The Mojave smells like heat that has decided to be direct with you. It smells like purpose. Here is the heat, it says. You can be in it or not. Those are the options. There are no accommodations. Washington smells like heat that has been filtered through approximately 200 years of indoor air conditioning and political ambition. Humid and vaguely institutional. The city doesn't so much have weather as it has weather policy. I arrived on a Tuesday morning, flew commercial for the first time in several months, and sat in the middle seat of a regional jet, between a man who was traveling with too many carry-on bags and a woman who fell asleep before we reached cruising altitude and remained aggressively, architecturally asleep until we landed. I spent most of the flight going over the Nighthawk 7 data I'd printed out, which got me several looks from the carry-on man that I did not respond to. Dulles is not a subtle airport. It announces itself. Everything at Dulles seems to be saying, yes, this is where the important things depart from and arrive at, in case you were unclear on that. I had not been to D.C. since a school trip when I was 12. I remembered the monuments as being larger than expected, and the museums as being free, and the general sensation of the city as being built by people who were extremely serious about posterity. Everything designed to be remembered. The difference, I thought, between places built to be remembered and places built to function is that the functional places are usually more interesting to work in. I took a cab to the address I'd been given, which was not a famous building. It was an ordinary glass and steel office structure in a part of D.C. that tourists don't visit, surrounded by parking garages and dry cleaners and a Subway sandwich location that seemed busy. The building had a lobby with a security desk and a person behind the security desk who looked at my ID with the particular carefully neutral expression of someone who has seen everything and reacts to none of it. I was given a badge, told to go to the 4th floor, told not to take photographs, which I hadn't been planning to. The elevator was slow in the way that elevators in government buildings are slow, methodically, apologetically slow, like they want you to know they have all the time in the world even if you don't. 4th floor. A conference room, 3 people already there. I'll call them what they called themselves, Dr. Merritt, Colonel Okafor, and a woman whose title was Program Liaison, and whose last name she didn't give me, which I filed under things to think about later. Dr. Merritt was from the engineering side. Early 50s, the kind of person whose hands do things while they talk, like they're always mentally assembling something. Colonel Okafor, I recognized by reputation. Fighter pilot background, command tour, now running something that wasn't fully described in any publicly available record. The liaison watched the room with an attentiveness that was not passive. She was tracking everything. Probably had been tracking me since I walked through the lobby. The conference room had no windows. There was a projector. There were bottles of water. There was the particular smell of a room that has been briefed in many times, and never quite aired out between briefings. I sat down. Lieutenant Vasquez, Dr. Merritt said, we're going to describe a program to you. At the end of that description, you can ask questions, and we'll answer what we can. Then we'd like your initial thoughts. He paused. What we're describing is still in the design phase. You'd be coming in early. How early? I said. Before the first attempt, Okafor said. And something in how he said it, the weight he put on first attempt, told me this would be another one of those. Another protocol. Another thing that hadn't been done yet. Chapter 14. The program they described. I'm going to be deliberately imprecise about some parts of this, both because certain elements remain classified as of the time I'm writing this, and because the full technical detail would take longer than I have patience for. But the shape of it I can give you. The program was called, at that point, Meridian. It was not primarily an aviation program, which surprised me. I'd assumed from the DC area code and the aviation context of the call that it would be an evolution of the Nighthawk 7 type. Threshold recovery, or something adjacent. It wasn't. Meridian was about integrated navigation. Specifically, navigation in what the documentation called denied environments. Places where GPS doesn't work, where conventional radio navigation is jammed or unavailable, where the standard suite of modern aviation and ground vehicle navigation tools becomes either unavailable or actively misleading. Electronic warfare scenarios. The growing complexity of environments where adversaries have learned to defeat the technologies that the last 30 years of military operations had become dependent on. The specific problem: pilots and operators who have been trained in environments where their instruments are correct cannot make fast, accurate decisions when their instruments are lying. That sentence hit me differently than I think they expected it to. Because I had, 10 days ago, sat in an aircraft where the instruments were not lying but were presenting truths that didn't apply to my specific situation. Where the altimeter told me something accurate and simultaneously irrelevant. Where the feedback delay made correct inputs feel wrong. Where the harmonic told me, honestly, that the configuration was dangerous. Just not beyond what I had 60 seconds to address. I had spent 60 seconds not being fooled by true things. Meridian was about building pilots and operators who could not be fooled by false things. Related problems, different solutions. Or maybe the same solution, approached from different angles. You want people who trust certain inputs over others, I said, when Merritt paused. He glanced at Okafor. That's one component, Merritt said. Not just trust. Hierarchy. Knowing which inputs to override and which to act on, and making that decision in real time, under load, when the cognitive cost of the decision is highest. Yes. He glanced at Okafor again. Colonel Voss described your performance in exactly those terms in his report. Voss wrote a report? Voss sends reports on everything, Okafor said, and something in his tone suggested this was known and appreciated. He described your decision architecture during the Nighthawk 7 protocol as, I'm quoting directly here, a prioritization model that was neither purely trained nor purely intuitive, but specifically adapted to the constraints of that scenario through deliberate pre-execution analysis. I sat with that for a moment, which was, essentially, Voss's way of saying, she did her homework and then she let it go and trusted the right things in the right order. What would my role be? I said. First, document what you know about how you did what you did, Merritt said. Not the technical protocol steps. We have that from the data feeds. The decision layer, the input hierarchy, the cognitive architecture that let you manage 7 simultaneous variables in 60 seconds without being paralyzed by any of them. And then help us build a training program around it. The liaison spoke for the first time. Her voice was precise in the way that suggested precision was a conscious choice she'd made some time ago. We're not building another test protocol, she said. We're building a methodology, a way of preparing operators for environments where their information is degraded or deceptive. You'd be at the design layer, not the execution layer. I looked at her. I'm 28 years old, I said. We know, she said, not dismissively. Factually. Most people who sit where I'm sitting have 30 years of operational experience. We know that too, she said. The people with 30 years of operational experience have 30 years of assumptions. Some of those assumptions are correct. Some of them are exactly what Meridian is trying to train out. A pause. What you did 10 days ago at Whitmore is, in some ways, the opposite of what 30 years of assumptions produce. I thought about that. What Voss had said, waiting for familiarity, trusting his first instinct, trusting his preparation. 3 of 4 pilots failed because of accumulated expertise, not despite it. You want someone who can think about the problem without being inside the problem, I said. We want someone who just demonstrated that she can think about the problem while being inside the problem, the liaison corrected. That's harder. Chapter 15. What I said yes to. The answer was yes, but it didn't happen in the conference room on Tuesday morning. It happened in pieces over the next 3 weeks, which is how real things happen. Not in cinematic moments of decision, but in the accumulation of smaller decisions that, taken together, add up to the big one. The first smaller decision was asking for 48 hours before I gave any answer. Merritt said yes. Okafor said nothing, which also meant yes. The liaison tilted her head a fraction of a degree. I flew back to California on a Wednesday. I ate the theoretical cheeseburger, which was real now and from a diner near the base that had been there since the Korean War era, and made them with the specific proportions that suggested decades of empirical research. I called Catalina. I sat outside in the Mojave night, warm and clear. The stars in that desert are something the word star doesn't fully account for, and thought about what I was thinking. The second smaller decision was going to see Voss. Not to ask permission. He'd already signed off, clearly. I went because I wanted to tell him what they'd said, what they'd quoted back to me, the prioritization model paragraph. He received this information with the altimeter face, as expected. Is it accurate? I said. He thought about it for a longer moment than Voss usually took to think. It's accurate to what I observed, he said. Whether it accurately describes what you were doing, you'd know better than I would. Can I teach it? I said. If I don't fully know what I was doing, can I teach other people to do it? He looked at his wall for a second. You know what you did, he said. You've just never had to say it out loud before. A pause. That's a different skill, but it follows from the same one. I thought about the 8 things he'd told me that Sunday morning. The specific, precise, non-dramatic information that had been the scaffolding for 60 seconds. You've been doing this already, I said. Teaching the way you taught me. I've been trying to, he said. The challenge is that what I gave you depended on what 4 other people found out the hard way. The methodology precedes the curriculum. So I helped build the curriculum. He looked at me with the altimeter face. I think, he said carefully, that the reason they called you specifically is that the curriculum is partly in your head and you don't fully know it yet. And the process of taking it out of your head and making it teachable is the first step of building the program. I sat with that. The third smaller decision was calling each of them. Rourke, Adeyemi, Parrish, Webb. I didn't ask permission for this either. I just did it, over the course of a week, because it felt necessary. Because I was going to go to Washington and try to build something out of what they'd contributed to, and it felt wrong to do that without talking to them first. The call with Rourke was the shortest. He was matter-of-fact about it. He'd moved on. He was at Fallon now. He thought the Meridian concept was sound. He said, "What got me was waiting. Don't let the curriculum teach waiting." The call with Adeyemi was the most technical. He walked me through his trim wheel inputs with a level of analytical detail that took 40 minutes and produced 4 pages of notes. He had, in the month since his attempt, essentially completed the post-mortem of his own 60 seconds, with rigorous precision. He knew exactly where each second had gone. He'd drawn diagrams. He had a spreadsheet. He emailed me the spreadsheet. The call with Parrish was the quietest. He didn't say much. He asked about Meridian, what kind of environment, what kind of degradation, and listened carefully, and then said, "The thing I'd put in there is the pause before the first input, the moment between disorientation clearing and your first decision. That pause is where the protocol breaks you. You either push through it fast or you let it define the rest of the 60 seconds. You pulled," I said. "I pulled before I had data," he said. "I made a decision and it was wrong, and I'd already committed before I knew it was wrong. The pause, even if it's 0.5 seconds, gives you data first. But the documentation says act early. Act early doesn't mean act without seeing. It means don't wait for certainty." He was quiet for a second. "There's a difference. I learned that the hard way." The call with Webb was the last one. I almost didn't make it, not because I was afraid, more because I didn't know what to say. What do you say to the man who was 57 seconds of success, and you were his 60? He answered on the second ring. "Lieutenant Vasquez," he said. "I heard." "Yes, sir." Don't call me sir anymore. You don't need to. I wasn't sure what to do with that. I wanted to tell you about the Washington program, I said. And I wanted to tell you about the aileron sensitivity data. It was in your debrief. Voss extracted it. You would have had it on your next attempt. A pause. I know, Webb said. Voss sent me the extract. Did he? He sends extracts to everyone who's been through the protocol. Every time there's new data, he sends it. He was sending me updates for 6 months after my attempt. Another pause. He gave you everything he had, didn't he? Yes. Good. That's what I told him to do. He said it simply, not heroically, like a fact. After I sat in my car for 45 minutes and finished feeling like a failure, I went back to Voss's office and told him, put everything I found into the next attempt's briefing. Don't hold anything back for the debrief. Give it all up front. I sat very still. That was your idea, I said. The 2.8 seconds on the trim wheel, that was the data Voss derived from ADME's debrief and my attempt combined. He would have had it eventually. I just told him not to wait. I thought about the fold of paper in my chest pocket, the diagram with the number 2.8, Webb in his car, Webb going back to Voss's office. You could have been angry, I said. I was angry, he said. That's not the same as being unhelpful. Chapter 16. The curriculum that didn't have a name yet. I want to fast forward slightly here, not to skip the work, because the work was the most interesting part, but because a full account of the next 6 months would require a separate document and possibly a separate career. The broad sketch. I went to Washington in September 2019. The Meridian program was housed in a building that was nondescript, in the specific way of things that don't want you to notice them. I had an office with a window, which I mentioned because it felt significant after years of barracks rooms without them. The window looked at a parking garage, but still. My primary task in the first months was exactly what the liaison had described, taking what was in my head and making it articulable, writing down, in words that another person could read and understand and apply, what the decision architecture of Nighthawk 7 had felt like from the inside. Not the technical steps, the cognitive layer, the input hierarchy, the moments of override. This was harder than flying the protocol. Flying the protocol took 60 seconds. I had trained for 60 seconds, explicitly and implicitly, for 9 years. I had the body for 60 seconds. I had the hands and the inner ear and the breathing, and the 9 years of accumulated hours. Writing about the 60 seconds required a completely different kind of skill set, which I didn't have, which meant I had to build it in real time, while also using it. Merritt was patient. He would sit across from me in a conference room and ask questions. Specific, technical, directed questions, and I would answer, and he would type what I said, and then he would read it back to me, and I would say, "That's not quite right," or, "That's close but it's missing something," or, "Yes, that's exactly it," and we would adjust, slowly, iteratively, the way you build something when you don't have a blueprint and have to derive the blueprint from the thing itself. The 4 conversations I'd had, Rourke, Adeyemi, Parrish, Webb, got added. Each one contributed something that my own account couldn't, because they'd each failed at a specific place, and I'd succeeded at those places partly because of what they'd found. Their failure data was structural. It went into the curriculum the way load-bearing walls go into a building. By December 2019, we had something that could be called a first draft. Not a training program exactly, more like a field guide. A document that said, here are the conditions under which trained operators fail to trust correct inputs and act on incorrect ones. Here is what those conditions feel like from the inside. Here is what the decision looks like at each of those moments. Here is what we know about how to prepare a mind to make the right decision in each of those moments. And here is the specific, empirically derived information we have about the timing of those decisions. It had 8 sections. I thought about that. 8 sections, for 8 pieces of information. The number was coincidental, but I noticed it. Chapter 17, what Rourke said in the second call. I called Rourke again in January 2020, when we were reviewing the first draft. He read the relevant section, the one about familiarity dependency, about the way trained pattern recognition can become an override on accurate situational assessment, and was quiet for a long time. "You described it better than I could have," he said. "I didn't know how it felt from the inside. I was guessing from the outside." "You weren't guessing," he said. "The paragraph about waiting for recognition, that's exactly what I did. I even know why I did it. I'd done recoveries before where the key was recognizing the pattern, where matching the current situation to a known situation was the right move. Nighthawk 7 was the first time I was in a situation where what I needed was to not recognize the pattern. To act without a template, I said. To act without needing one, which is different from acting recklessly." He paused. "The section doesn't make that distinction clearly enough. Recklessness is acting without information. What you're describing is acting with a different kind of information than the one you're trained to use." I added that to the draft, word for word almost. "I have one question," Rourke said. "Okay. What made you different? Not technically, not the aileron data or the breathing thing. What made you the one who got through?" I thought about it for a long time. Not the briefing room performance of an answer, the real one. "I don't know if I'm different," I said, finally. "I think I might have just been the one who got all the information that the previous 4 attempts generated. You guys built the ladder, I climbed it." "That's not the whole answer," Rourke said. "No. The other part is..." I stopped, tried to find the words. "I think I was willing to be where I was, in that specific 60 seconds, at that specific altitude, in that configuration. I didn't fight the where I am. I just did the next thing, and the next, without needing the situation to be different from what it was." That sounds like something from a self-help book. I know, but I think it's true. He was quiet. "The curriculum should say that," he said. "Not in self-help language. In operational language. The acceptance of the actual situation as the operating condition, rather than the preferred situation. Situational acceptance as a performance variable. Yes, that. I added that to the draft too. People ask me sometimes what it felt like to be the first. First woman, first in 4 attempts, first to complete Nighthawk 7. And I think about how to answer that without being dismissive. Because I don't want to be dismissive. The firsts matter, they absolutely matter. But also without overstating what the first actually was. Here's the true thing. I was first in the sense that I was the one who happened to have all the pieces at the right time. The pieces were assembled by 5 people, including me. The other 4 contributed what they found, and I contributed what I did with what they found, and the combination was sufficient. A first, in that sense, is more like a culmination than a beginning. Except it was also a beginning. Because the curriculum we built, the Meridian methodology, which was eventually formalized and went through revision cycles and peer review and all the things that transform a legal pad full of notes into an official training framework, that went forward. It didn't stop at my 60 seconds. It started there. By summer 2020, the first cohort of pilots had been through the Meridian preliminary curriculum, 12 of them, selected from different branches, different backgrounds, different levels of prior operational experience. They weren't all aviation. 4 of them were ground vehicle operators, 2 were drone operators, 1 was a naval officer who worked in submarine navigation. The common thread was their operational environment. All 12 worked in scenarios where the quality and reliability of their navigation and situational information was likely to degrade under adversarial conditions. I sat in on the initial briefings. Not as an instructor. I was too new to instruction, too aware of how much I didn't know about teaching, to trust myself in that role yet. But as an observer, and occasionally as a voice that said, "When I was in the 60 seconds, here's what that felt like." That last part turned out to be more valuable than I expected. Because there's something about hearing a person describe the inside of a decision, not the technical steps, not the data outputs, not the training framework, but the actual interior experience of doing the hard thing, that gets into a trainee's head differently than a briefing document gets in. Parrish said it on the phone. without meaning to frame it this way. The pause is where the protocol breaks you. You either push through it fast or you let it define the rest of the 60 seconds. That sentence, in my voice, delivered in a training room to 12 people who were about to go through something that would put them in their own version of the 60 seconds. That sentence landed differently than when I read it in a briefing document. I know this because I could see it in their faces. Not all of them. Not the ones who were already in the learning mode, already past the point of needing to be convinced. But the ones who were still performing confidence, still running the trained pilot armor, still waiting for something that would tell them why this was different from the training they'd already been through. Those faces changed when I described the inside of T+23. The animal part of my brain said, with complete seriousness, "This is the end." That part. They heard that and stopped performing. Which is, maybe, the whole point of being first at something. Not the achievement itself. The description of it, afterward, that lets someone else know what they're going to feel before they feel it. The translation of the inside experience into words that travel forward. Chapter 19. Adeyemi's Spreadsheet. In March 2020, Adeyemi flew to Washington. He wasn't asked. He came because he'd been working on the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet by then was 847 rows and 43 columns. It was a complete second-by-second breakdown of every decision moment in the Nighthawk 7 protocol, cross-referenced with his own attempts data, my attempts data, and the hypothetical constructions he'd built for Rourke's and Parrish's and Webb's data from the available debrief records. It was, essentially, a mathematical description of the inside of 60 seconds. He sat across from Merritt and me in the conference room, the one without windows, the one that smelled like accumulated briefings, and walked us through it. Not all 847 rows. The key nodes, the decision points, the moments where the protocol's design intersected with a human operator's limitations, and the specific nature of each intersection. At T+3 to T+5, he said, 3 of 5 pilots show a measurable reduction in input rate. This is the disorientation clearance period. The body is recalibrating. The input's slow because the pilot is verifying that the situation is what the situation seems to be before committing to action. And the 4th pilot, Merritt said, one of the 5, one of us, shows accelerated input initiation beginning at T+3, before full clearance. He looked at me. Vasquez. I nodded. The breathing technique, he said. It shortened the clearance time subjectively. She was 1.5 seconds ahead by T+5. That 1.5 seconds, Merritt said, was the margin. Every subsequent decision she made had that 1.5 seconds as a buffer. It didn't eliminate the time pressure. It changed the arithmetic of the time pressure. He put up a graph. Clean, precise, Adeyemi-type graph, showing the time budgets of all 5 attempts, the areas where each attempt was ahead of or behind the minimum required pace, a kind of topographical map of 60 seconds rendered in data. Mine had a shape that was different from the others, not because it was more skilled across the board, because it was slightly ahead in the early seconds, and that early margin paid forward through every subsequent decision. This is the thing I want the curriculum to get right, Adeyemi said. It's not about any single moment. It's about the compounding of early decisions. The first 5 seconds set the arithmetic for everything that follows. He handed Merritt a printed version of the graph. Section 3 needs to be rebuilt around this, he said. What's in there now is about the hydraulic anomaly and the feedback lag as separate problems. But they're not separate. They're downstream effects of the early seconds arithmetic. If the trainee understands the arithmetic in the first 5 seconds, the middle 40 seconds become different problems. We rebuilt Section 3. It took 6 weeks. The final version was, I think, the best section of the curriculum. It was also almost entirely Adeyemi's. I told him that. It's not mine, he said. It's the data's. I just read it carefully enough to hear what it was saying, which was such an Adeyemi thing to say that I didn't even try to argue. Chapter 20. Webb came last. Marcus Webb came to Washington in June 2020. Almost exactly 1 year after his 57 seconds, I'd expected him to be different from the calls. Phone calls compress people into their voice, and his voice was measured and even, and you could tell there was something controlled happening, but you couldn't see what it was controlling. In person, he was taller than I'd expected, and had the specific posture of someone who has carried a lot of weight in his career and has been careful about which muscles he uses to do the carrying. We met in a coffee shop near the building, not in the building itself. That was his choice, and I respected it. Some conversations belong in rooms where you can leave. He looked at the curriculum document for about 20 minutes, reading carefully, slowly. The way you read something when you want to be fair to it. "It's good," he said. "It's better than I expected." "There's still a lot of revision to do," I said. "There always is." He set it down, held his coffee mug, just holding it, not drinking. "The section on the aileron correction. Yes. It's accurate. The 2% sensitivity difference. The rollout timing." He looked at his mug. "What it doesn't capture is the thing I was feeling at T+54 when I made the input, and it didn't respond the way I'd practiced." "Tell me what it felt like." He was quiet for a moment. "Like I'd been preparing for a door and arrived at a different door," he said. "Not a dramatically different door. Almost the same door, but the handle was on the wrong side." I wrote that down. "The handle was on the wrong side," I said. "That's exactly what I want in the curriculum. Not the technical description, that description. Because the trainee is going to feel something like that, and if they've never heard that framing before, they'll think they've made an error when they've actually just encountered a door with the handle on the wrong side. What do you do when the handle is on the wrong side? You adjust," I said. "You don't panic. You don't recalibrate your entire understanding of doors. You just adjust." He looked at me. "That's the difference," he said, "between my 57 and your 60. "One of them," I said. "What are the others?" "You told Voss to put everything into the next attempt's briefing." He looked away, picked up his coffee. "That's not a difference," he said. "That's a contribution. It's both." He drank his coffee. We sat for a little while. "What does the next protocol look like?" he said. "The Meridian equivalent. The thing someone does now that's like what we did." "It doesn't look like Nighthawk 7, I said. "It's not a single event. It's a 30-hour training progression. The disorientation phases are distributed across multiple sessions. The input hierarchy decisions are practiced incrementally. The feedback lag scenarios are introduced in layers. Easier. Different. Each layer is hard, but you don't go in cold to 60 seconds of everything at once." He thought about that. "Better methodology," he said. "Better information," I said. "Better method of giving people the information. You four. You went in with what was available at the time. We have more now. Because of the four of us. Because of the four of you." He was quiet for a long time, doing something internal that I didn't interrupt. Then, "How many people have been through the curriculum?" 47, as of last month. The first full cohort is 16 weeks out. How are they doing? Better than expected. Section 3 in particular, Adeyemi's section, the early seconds arithmetic. It's producing measurably faster decision initiation times across the cohort. They're going into their disruption scenarios already ahead of the pace. Like you were ahead at T+3. Like they're trained to be ahead at T+3, I said. That's the difference. For me, it was a breathing technique I developed on my own and never told anyone about. For them, it's week 2 of the curriculum. He nodded. The same nod Voss used, the one that's a period. "Good," he said. "That's the right outcome." We talked for another hour. About the aileron section, which he helped me revise on a paper napkin. About the feedback lag section, which he thought was missing something about the second-guess reflex that I added to my notes. About the oscillation section, which was already, in his opinion, the best written part of the curriculum, and which had come almost entirely from DeWitt's 2 sentences about not counting. When he left, he shook my hand. Not a formal handshake, more like the handshake of someone who has decided that you're on the same side of something. When the second cohort finishes, he said, "Tell me how they do." "I will." He walked out into the DC summer and was gone. I sat for another few minutes, finished my coffee, looked at the napkin with the aileron section notes, thought about 57 seconds and 60 seconds, and the 3-second gap between them that had been, ultimately, filled with information. Just information, passed from one person to another, in the specific belief that what you find the hard way belongs to whoever comes next. Chapter 21. The Hawk and the Thermal. I want to tell you something about hawks. Not metaphorically. Actually. The hawk I watched from my barracks window on the evening of July 14th, the one working the thermal above the ridge, does something that took me a while to understand when I first saw it at the age of 12 on a school trip to the Mojave, and that I think about still. A hawk riding a thermal is not doing nothing. This is the misconception. The wings are spread, and the bird isn't flapping, and it looks effortless, and you think, the bird is resting. The bird is on autopilot. The thermal is doing the work. But if you watch carefully, and I've watched it carefully many times, you see the continuous, tiny adjustments, the wing angle changing fractionally, the tail spreading or narrowing by millimeters, the head tilting, tracking something, then returning to center, the whole body making dozens of micro-corrections per minute, each one invisible from any distance, each one absolutely necessary for the bird to maintain the exact relationship with the thermal that keeps it aloft. The bird is not riding the thermal. The bird is managing the thermal, continuously, precisely, without stop. And the reason it looks effortless is not because it isn't work. It's because the bird has done this its entire life, and the work has become embedded below the level of conscious effort, and the result of all that embedded work is flight that appears, from the outside, to require nothing. I think about that hawk a lot. I think about it when I'm in a training session and a student is getting frustrated because the input hierarchy isn't becoming automatic fast enough, isn't feeling like second nature yet, is still requiring conscious attention when it should be below the waterline. I tell them, the hawk looks like it isn't working. The hawk is always working. You just can't see it yet. You're training toward not seeing it. The 60 seconds of Nighthawk 7 looked, from the protocol data, like a series of clean, decisive actions performed in the correct sequence at approximately the correct times, which is what it was. It also took 9 years of embedded work to produce those 60 seconds. 9 years of thousands of hours, of every instructor who gave me a useful piece of information, of every mistake I corrected, and every correction I let land deeply enough to become reflex. 9 years of a breathing exercise that nobody thought was operationally relevant. 9 years of reading appendices for fun. None of that is visible in the 60 seconds. It just is the 60 seconds. Chapter 22. What I want you to take from this. I've been telling you this story for a while now. I've given you the protocol, the briefings, the failures, the 60 seconds, the debrief, the DC phone call, the curriculum. I've given you Rourke and Adeyemi, and Parrish, and Webb, and Voss, and DeWitt, and Merritt, and Okafor, and the liaison whose last name I still don't know, and my sister Catalina, on her couch in San Diego. I've given you the hawk. Now I want to tell you the thing that took me 2 years after July 14th, 2019 to fully understand. The title of this account, The Thing They Said Couldn't Be Done, is not about the Nighthawk 7 protocol. Nobody actually said the protocol couldn't be done. What they said, what the data said, what the record of 4 failures said, was that it hadn't been done yet. Those are different statements. Can't be done is a statement about the world. Hasn't been done yet is a statement about where we are in the process of doing it. The difference between those two statements is the difference between stopping and continuing. Rourke didn't stop. He went to Fallon. He told me, don't teach waiting. Adeyemi didn't stop. He built a spreadsheet with 847 rows. He came to Washington. He rebuilt Section 3. Parrish didn't stop. He thought about the pause. He told me, act without needing certainty. Webb didn't stop. He sat in his car for 45 minutes. Then he went back to Voss's office and said, "Put everything into the next attempt." None of them stopped. That's not a small thing. 4 people who did not succeed, who went through something difficult and came out on the other side of it without the thing they'd gone in for. And not one of them treated that as the end of the story. All of them treated it as information, as data, as the next plank in the bridge. The thing that couldn't be done, the thing that really couldn't be done, was doing it alone, without the 4 who went first, without Voss's 8 briefing points, without DeWitt's Appendix F, without the 2.8 seconds on the trim wheel that Webb's attempt had made calculable. Alone, I would have been a 5th failure. A slightly different failure, probably. Different point of breakdown, different data for the next person. With everything they gave me, I was 60 seconds. Epilogue, July 14th, 2021. I went back to Whitmore on the 1-year anniversary. Not officially. Not for a ceremony. There wasn't a ceremony. Whitmore doesn't do ceremonies. I went because I wanted to see the tarmac and the runway and the Mojave doing its indifferent thing, and because anniversaries are moments when the distance between where you are and where you were is most legible. DeWitt was there, as he is always there, as he has been there for 22 years, standing outside with his coffee mug, looking at the sky. The sky was doing something. Same as a year ago. Not a storm, not dramatic, just textured. Cirrus wisps moving sideways when the ground wind was moving forward. I stood next to him. "Back," he said, not a question. "For the day." He nodded, looked at the sky. 49 pilots through the curriculum, I told him. The number as of that morning. Second full cohort starts in September. He sipped his coffee. Considered this. "Section F," he said. "Section F," I confirmed. "It's week 2, module 3, not counting during the oscillation. It's in there." He nodded again, looked at the sky a little longer. He said, which I had learned, by then, was DeWitt's way of saying, "Good. That's good. I am glad that the thing I said in passing, standing by an aircraft at 8:45 in the morning, made it into the thing that will be said to people who go into 60-second windows for the next 20 years. I am glad that what I knew without being asked to know it turned out to matter." All of that, in one syllable. I looked at the sky with him for a while. The Mojave was doing what it does. The heat rising, the light laying itself out in long angles. The hawk, or a hawk, they're all hawks from this distance, working a thermal above the ridge with that perfect, invisible, continuous effort that looks, from the ground, like nothing at all. 300 meters out on the secondary runway, the modified A-22 sat in the morning sun. Just a machine, just metal and composites and wiring. Waiting, knowing nothing about what it had been a part of. Not needing to. I want to end with something small, not the curriculum or the DC program or the cohorts or the methodology. Something small. There's a card on my desk. I've been in the Meridian building long enough to have acquired a desk, a window, a view of a parking garage that I've become genuinely fond of. On the desk there's a card that Catalina sent me after the July 14th protocol. Not a congratulations card, not a card with a picture of an aircraft or an inspirational quote from someone famous. It's a plain card, cream-colored, and on the inside, in Catalina's handwriting. The handwriting that hasn't changed since she was 11 years old, big and a little tilted to the right. It says, "You did the next thing. Keep doing the next thing." That's it. That's the whole card. I've thought about that sentence in a lot of contexts. I've thought about it at T+23, when the animal part of my brain had its opinion. I've thought about it in the conference room without windows, when the curriculum draft was 80 pages of wrong and needed to be rebuilt. I've thought about it on phone calls with 4 men who didn't succeed but kept going anyway. The next thing. Not the final thing. Not the perfect thing. Not the thing that explains the whole story. The next one. Because the 60 seconds is always made of 60 next ones. And the curriculum is built out of all the 60 seconds that came before the thing that finally worked. And the careers are built out of the curricula. And the programs are built out of the careers. And somewhere out ahead of all of it, somewhere in the training progression of a pilot who hasn't been born yet, in a scenario that hasn't been designed yet, in a 60-second window that hasn't been opened yet, someone is going to have a piece of information that comes, distantly, from Webb sitting in his car, and ADME's spreadsheet, and Parrish's pause, and Rourke's patience, and DeWitt's 2 sentences, and Voss's legal pad. They won't know where it came from. They'll just know it. And they'll do the next thing. They said it couldn't be done. 4 pilots tried. 4 pilots found the edges. And then 1 girl climbed everything they'd built. In 60 seconds. Which turned out to be exactly enough time.